Hey everyone, and welcome to this, which is a second of two videos on rugby. Well, I hope it's the second of two. I've just finished a trip to London where I was involved in a big shape of the game meeting with a bunch of elite coaches and referees, officials, CEOs of various unions and competitions. And I did a bit of work in preparation for that, some of which you saw in my last video. And the second part, which I didn't present all of this. Some of it I did, but some of it's new. So that's hopefully interesting to you. And then at this point, I'll draw a line under rugby and we can move on to other sports, other ball sports specifically. But this particular video is about the head contact process. Now, in my recent clip I showed you was one discussing head injuries and how they happen and why sanction has been applied to try and reduce tackle height based on the evidence we'd accumulated, and how, for instance, the risk of a head injury to the ball carrier is almost 800 times greater when there's a red card compared to when it's legal. And it's 40 times greater for the tackler. So we think we're on the right track. So the what, in other words, what we are trying to do, we believe is correct. How we do it remains the question. And that's really what this presentation is about. So I'm going to share my screen with you and then basically talk you through the World Rugby head contact process. By way of background, and this is important, of course, is that in 2017 it was that World Rugby issued its first zero tolerance directive. That was based on the data that I shared with you the other day, where we'd found that when a tackler's head was above the ball carrier's sternum and they were sharing airspace, head on shoulder, the risk of a head injury was much higher. So we said, all right, well, in that case, what we want to do is nudge or drive the tackler lower. And that meant applying high tackle law more harshly and more frequently to try and get it lower. In 2017, and I'm going to show you some of these stats in a moment, we applied what was called a zero tolerance directive, and things went all over the place. Some went up, some went down, some stayed the same. There was no rhyme nor reason. And we realized very early on that there was a consistency issue and an understanding application issue. And that led to the development of this document, which is called the High Tackle Sanction Framework. Now, this is now a museum piece, and I'm not going to talk through it in huge detail, but basically it asked the referee to identify first, was it a shoulder charge or a high tackle? In other words, shoulder or arm. And then based on those decisions, ask what the degree of danger was and whether mitigation applied. For a high tackle, was it the shoulder or the head? Was it the arm? What was the degree of danger? That gives you your initial decision. And then there was a bunch of mitigating factors that you can see here on the bottom right, which would then ultimately lead to the decision. That concept, and I still back this, I think it was sound and rigid and clear, but it was eventually challenged and not really accepted very widely by coaches and referees. And so it was replaced by this in 2021, which was the head contact process. And that's what this video is basically a tutorial on. Now, there are 4 things in this head contact process that you, the viewer, need to answer. Question number 1, have you seen head contact? If no, play on. If yes, keep going. Question number 2, was that head contact the result of foul play? In other words, it can be accidental, completely unavoidable, no foul play. If that's the case, the answer is no, and you play on. But if you believe that there was foul play, yes, the player's at fault, you go to question 3, which is what was the degree of danger? Now, there was a separate part to this that gave the referees some guidance on what constituted high danger compared to low danger. So, for instance, high danger was tackler at speed, reckless and out of control, swinging arm, leading with the head, upright tackle, and dynamic. Those would indicate high danger, whereas lower speed, high level of control, no swinging arm, bent would indicate lower danger. So the referee for question 3 would have to answer this question. And then let's say, for instance, decided that it was high in danger, they'd go red card. And then question 4 is there any mitigation? Mitigation, for instance, if the ball carrier changes direction or height very suddenly, if another player pushes a player into the path of the tackler, for instance, that would be mitigation. If they're unsighted, it might be mitigation. And if the answer to this is yes, then that red card can change to yellow, yellow can change to penalty. Now, a couple of very important things. This process and the high tackle sanction process before it were not designed to create perfect decisions. Yes, we all want consistency and agreement, but I hope that you can appreciate that there is a subjective element to every single step. Even head contact, I'll show you. If you don't believe me, I'll prove to you in a moment there is. Foul play, to some degree, that's subjective. One person will assess something as foul play, not another. Degree of danger is very subjective. To some people, a situation will be medium in danger and therefore yellow card. To others, it'll be red card. And then finally, mitigation is also subjective. Did that ball carrier drop quickly enough in order to be mitigated, that for the tackler to be mitigated against? So at every single one of these 4 steps, there is an element of subjectivity, and humans are making these decisions. So there's not going to be perfect agreement. That was never the intention of either the high tackle sanction framework or this head contact process. Instead, the idea was, let's give the referee a process that will improve agreement, consistency, validity, but allow people to understand how the decision was reached, so that when we now see a red card or a yellow card, we at least understand what that process was that got to that point, as opposed to, that looks like a yellow, I'm giving a yellow. Because even if we disagree that something is red or yellow, we think it should have been vice versa, yellow or red, at least now we understand why we disagree. That was more valuable, in my mind, plus it's transparent, very valuable, than just letting the guy or the woman on the field with a whistle say, that's red. So that was the point. How did it go? Now, what you're looking at here is the head contact sanction rate. In other words, anytime head contact is seen and penalized, penalty, yellow, or red, all of them in one, right? And it's every 10 matches that I'm showing you as a function of the last 7 seasons. Now, we have in 2017 a zero tolerance directive applied. So 2016 is your, call it, control year. That's before any of these initiatives were put into place. And what you will see is that in the season after the zero tolerance directive, there was globally, across all 5 of these competitions, England, Southern Hemisphere, European, French, and the club, sort of the Heineken Cup, the Champions League equivalent, there was an increase, almost a doubling in some instances, in the number of head contact sanctions. That's progress. That's kind of the intention. That increase differed in magnitude. Then what happens is in 2018, in some it kept going up, in others it came down, and in others it more or less stayed the same. By 2019, it had gone up, it had continued to fall, it had stayed the same. So at that point, we were seeing chaos, basically. And there was controversy every week because nobody understood exactly what was meant to happen. And it was, in our opinion, undermining the effectiveness. Remember, the point of all this was that the sanction, the card or the penalty, was meant to convey a message to the players and the coaches that would then change the behavior in order to get the tackle safer. And when you see this, wavy patterns all over the place, there's not much confidence that that's going to happen. And so in the mid-2019, we introduced the high tackle sanction framework in an attempt to try and create a little bit more consistency across the world, within a tournament over time and between tournaments over time. And what you'll notice is that in 2020, the chaos continued. So, for instance, in Super Rugby, we saw an increase of 20%. In the top 14, we saw a reduction in the range of 20 to 25%. In some competitions, it stayed the same. There's another decrease. There's another decrease. So it simply didn't land well. And there's a few reasons for that. There was major pushback. It was being undermined by certain influential people, unfortunately, and it proved at that time very frustrating to get the process to work. And so the reaction to that was to create then a head contact process, which was meant to be simplified. I showed you that's the 4-question framework. And somewhat encouragingly now, we've seen, okay, in top 14 aside, although it was already the lowest, we've now seen a similar pattern across the world. Now, it's a reduction, which to some degree might be alarming, but this could be real. We don't know. But where we are today in terms of overall penalties is as close to consistent across the world as we've been at any point since we began. So in that regard, while we don't know if it's right or not, it's at least the same or similar. Where this gets interesting and more important, I think, is when we look at the severe sanctions. So now it's yellow and red cards. So on your left is the yellow card rate every 100 matches. And on your right is the red card rate every 100 matches. Stay with me on yellow. Remember, in 2016, our control year, we issue a zero tolerance directive. And look at that, major increases in yellow cards in 2 competitions. In 3 competitions, hardly any change. In other words, you were as likely to see a yellow card after the zero tolerance directive as you were before. And that's quite discouraging, because if a zero tolerance directive is being applied, yellow cards have to go up, and they didn't. Remember, penalties go up, but yellow cards stay the same. So they're giving more sanction, but not sanctioning it as severely. And the same is true of the red cards. I'll show you in a moment, but stay with me on yellow. Look then at 2018, major drops in the second year, some go up. Then the one that dropped goes up. The one that dropped keeps going. The one that was going up keeps going. So again, mixed patterns, no consistency, no rhyme nor reason. The high tackle sanction framework caused increases in 1, 2, 3, but not huge. In one competition, fewer. The head contact process has caused an increase in 4 of the 5 competitions. The only one where it didn't is the one that had the highest yellow card rate already. And so it might already be that they were applying it using the high tackle sanction framework. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the point is that this spaghetti on your left-hand side strongly suggests that we haven't seen uniform application of the head contact principle. And so when people say, oh, it hasn't worked, it hasn't reduced the concussion, I'm looking at this and saying, well, why would it? It's been so inconsistently applied over time and within competitions. So there are concerns around that. And the same is true on red cards, by the way. That's the control. The 2017 season, there was definitely an increase overall in the red card rate, but very small. I mean, it goes up quite a lot in 2 competitions. In one competition, it came down by about 50%. So having told these competitions to sanction head contacts more severely, some of them had fewer red cards. Then it went up, then stayed the same. The high tackle sanction framework produced an increase in 1, 2, 3 competitions and a decrease in 2. So again, the message just didn't appear to be landing. And then in 2020 and 2021, we began to see significant increases. And I look at the blue lines, dark and light, look at the orange line. And the orange is Super Rugby, where it's interesting because the head contact process was combined with the 20-minute red card. And that's what's managed to push them to such high levels. So the moment you give the referee an option to give a 20-minute red card, they would be more inclined to give it because they're not as scared of ruining the game. Whether that needs to be something done globally is the big debate. Does a softer sanction used more frequently have the same effect on player behavior as the harsher sanction used slightly less often? We don't really know that, but it is worth discussing and considering. However, where we are now is overall, across all 5 competitions, there's a red card every 10th match for a head contact tackle. It used to be every 62nd match back here. So yes, there are far more red cards, but I would argue that we're only now beginning to see the proper, consistent application of yellow and red cards to high tackles. So if there are going to be changes, we'll see them from this point forward. How severely is head contact sanctioned? This to me is the most striking. What this is showing is the ratio of penalties to cards. So in other words, the referee sees a tackle where there's head contact. He says, that's foul play. Now the question is he going to give the card, yes or no? And this is any card, yellow or red. And what you'll notice is in about 2016, roughly every 7th to 10th penalty was being carded in some form. In 2017, in England, for instance, it went up. In other words, you were less likely to see a card when there was a high tackle than before. In Super Rugby and in Top 14, for instance, it went down. Then once again, we've seen various changes, but the PRL is the one that I think has gone this trajectory to me is good. Because what this means is that as of today, in 21 and 22, a penalty for head contact is more likely to be carded than ever before. In other words, it used to be every 14th head contact tackle would receive a card. It's now down to every 3rd to 4th red card tackle. So that is a significant, not red card, any color card. That's a significant increase in sanction severity for head contact. And this is just to show you what red cards look like. And again, look at the variability in 2016. Look at the variability as recently as 2020 and compare it to where we are now in 21 and 22. This to me tells a story that we've reached to some degree consistency across competitions, because we're now at the point where every 10th to 20th high tackle is going to get a red card. It used to be as much as 180. I mean, it's extraordinary. Look, for instance, in Super Rugby in 2020, you would see 100 high tackles before you would see a red card. It was 99 high tackles were not red carded. And then it dropped to below 20. I mean, the inconsistency has been enormous, and it has affected, in our opinion, behavior. So where are we now? Right now, every 10 matches, there are 10 high tackle penalty or sanctions. That's 1 per match. Right now, every 10.2 matches, you'll see a red card. In other words, in an entire weekend of English rugby, Super Rugby, you would see slightly over 1 red card on average. What that means is that for a team that plays 20 matches a season, they would expect to get 2 red cards per season, 1 every 10 games. And then finally, every 10.4 head contacts on the field are going to be given a red card. So you watch 9.4 before you see a red card. To me, these are not frightening numbers. People are talking about chaos and every game's going to have red cards. Not even close. The data suggests otherwise. What we have seen over time is a significant likelihood that red cards will be given. Back in 2016, there were slightly under 1. It then has grown. Now it's slightly lower, but more severely sanctioned, as you see in the blue here. Back in 2016, there was a red card every 62 matches, and every 52nd head contact got a red card. By 2018, it was every 27 matches, then every 17. Now it's every 10th match we'll see a red card. It used to be every 52nd head contact was red carded. It then dropped 34, 20, and now down to 10. So this suggests that we took a while and it was trending right, but I do believe we're now consistent and similar enough across competitions that we can start to say that we're achieving the message to drive behavior. Whether or not that works, that's the next thing. But it's taken 5 years to get to even this point. Now, what I want to do is I want to throw the ball into your court. And I want to ask you to use this head contact process on the left-hand side. Remember, 4 questions. Was there head contact? Yes or no? Number 2, was there foul play? Yes or no? If yes and yes, what was the degree of danger that you saw based on speed, recklessness, swinging arm, dynamic tackle? And then number 4 is there anything that the ball carrier has done that would mitigate and reduce the sanction? So I'm going to play you 4 clips, and I want you to apply those 4 questions. Don't just look at these and go, that's red, that's yellow. Please be deliberate and go systematically through them and ask yourself these 4 questions. Here comes number 1. Here's the tackle. You'll see a few angles of it. So 4 questions. Head contact, yes or no? Foul play, yes or no? Danger, from low to high. Mitigation, yes or no? And again, I know you'll have an instant reaction to it, but I want you to be deliberate because that's what we've asked the officials to be. There's a freeze frame at the moment of contact. That helps the referee with question number 1, as you can imagine. And then hopefully by now you've gone through all 3 of those questions. Here's one more angle, and then I'm going to move on. Right, so this has been put to, what World Rugby does is does these calibration exercises, and it's been put to a number of coaches, officials, referees, and so forth in order to help arrive at their decision. I'm going to show you their results. You tell me if you agree with their decision. That's what they've decided. That's the management. There's those who oversee the process. 22 referees were asked and TMOs. I'll show you the coaches' perceptions in a moment. So there you go. That's an official view of it. If you said red card, you'd be in the large majority. Next one. Here it comes. It's this tackle here that you've just seen. Again, you'll get a number of replays, slow motion, and some freeze frames. It's number 3, I think. Yep, that's the player. 3 blue. Again, use the process. Has head contact occurred? Was there any foul play? What was the degree of danger? And is there any mitigation that might be applied? You might, for instance, consider, and I'm giving you hints, the presence of that first tackler there on the left-hand side as mitigation for the second player. Does the ball carrier drop in height? One more replay, then I'll move on. Okay, so I'm going to say yes to head contact, yes to foul play, degree of danger, yes with that shoulder, but there might well be mitigation. Let's see what everyone else thought on this one. So, interestingly, not as clear-cut as the previous one. Management slightly outnumbers on red. Referees, you'll see, 14 out of the 22 go yellow card. And that's almost certainly because they thought mitigation should apply. TMOs, similar ratios to those referees. So the officials agree. And ultimately, the consensus here would probably be a yellow card. What did you get? Next one. Again, you'll see some replays. It's that tackle that you've just seen happen there. The last one before the ball goes clear. Once again, you'll get a number of angles on this. Not to labor the point, but run through the process. It's this one now, not the first tackle. It's that player there, number 22, white. Yeah. So once again, was there head contact? You'll see a freeze frame. Was there foul play? What was the degree of danger? High, medium, low. And then was there any mitigation that you can use to reduce that initial sanction down in order to get to your final decision? You're now Wayne Barnes. There's Barnesy on your right. Okay, so where are you? Play on, penalty, yellow, or red? Let's have a look at what the referee decisions on this one were. So there you go. So out of all those who voted, only one red card here. And there was one of the TMOs. The consensus decision, fairly overwhelmingly among the officials, is a yellow card. Now, why might that be? That's one of 2 things. They've either decided that it's medium in danger without mitigation, or they've decided that it's high danger but could be mitigated, which is probably the main one. If they've said medium danger with mitigation, it'll be a penalty. So you understand, hopefully, a little bit now how this all works. And this is what's important to try and understand. And hopefully you appreciate that these things are not as straightforward as your instinct tells you. Speaking of instinct, I want to share with you the results of a little survey that I was lucky enough to do on some coaches. So what we did here was we had 17 clips. You've just seen 3 of them, by the way. They were in this cohort. And we got a group of coaches, 20 in total, to watch those 17 clips. And we said to them 2 things. Number one is snap judgment. What should it be? Yellow, penalty, red card, play on. Without using the process, tell us what the decision should have been. What was your subjective or initial reaction? Then watch the clip again, a second time, a third time if necessary, and this time use the head contact process the way that you just have, and give your answers to each of the questions within it. And then what we did, or what I did, was I compared them as follows. So first of all, what was the subjective decision? When those coaches watched it for the first time, what did they say? Was it red, yellow, penalty, play on? Then, using the head contact process for each of the 17 clips, what was the majority decision in each of the 4 questions? Was there head contact? Was there foul play? What was the danger? And should mitigation apply? And then obviously the sum of those 4 gives you the final decision. And then I worked out overall agreement. And I want to show you those results because I think they're quite interesting. So first, before I get onto that, one of the really important questions I think that the sport and its fans need to agree on, or at least understand, is how much do we want to agree? Like, what's the standard here? Is it perfection? Obviously, it should be, could be, theoretically. But I think most reasonable people in good faith would recognize that there's no standard of perfection here. You're not going to get 100% of people to agree 100% of the time. So what is the target? In other words, if I was to show 100 people 100 clips, how often would we want agreement with the majority decision? So let's show 100 clips and we say, all right, what was the majority? Yellow card, fine. 65% of people said yellow card. How often across 17 clips or those 100 clips do we want to achieve that level of agreement? 65%, for instance, agreeing on what the decision is. Because you can understand that it differs if we say, if our target is 75% agreement and we want that to be the number of people who agree, that's different from 90. It's certainly different from a 50-50 where you get a narrow majority or narrow consensus. So I did that in this instance. And so what you're looking at here, and this is to me the most interesting thing, is when the coaches asked for their subjective impression, what do they say as a decision? And when they use the head contact process, what do they say? And you're looking at the percentage agreement with the majority against the target agreement, right? So let me give you some examples. First of all, this is using the head contact process where, for instance, if we say that the agreement target is 50% or more, what we get when using the head contact process is 70% agreement. In other words, 70% of the time, you'll get a 50% or more agreement. Hope that makes sense. In other words, we're going to get a majority in 70% of our cases. Here, for instance, if you set your agreement target at 2/3, we only achieve a 2/3 majority in just over half of all tackles. So if I showed you 100 tackles, we would reach a 2/3 agreement in 53 out of those 100. That's what this is saying. Now let's look at what happens when the coach's subjective opinion is applied. First thing that's really obvious is that you are less likely to get agreement subjectively than using the head contact process. For instance, we see a 2/3 majority in only 29% of cases. Head contact process, 2/3 majority agreement is reached in 53% of cases. Now it's down to 29, just under half. Well, sorry, just over half. So what that tells you is that the head contact process actually does do its job in the sense that it is more likely to deliver agreement than subjective impressions. That alone is an argument in support of its use. Overall, across all 17 clips, we found a 63% agreement with majority using the head contact process and a 57% agreement with the majority using the subjective threshold. So again, the head contact process outperforms subjective opinion. The other interesting thing here is that when referees use the tool, the overall agreement is 82%. When the disciplinary officials use it, it's just under 70%. And when coaches use it, it's just over 60%. So the referee, who's most accustomed to using it, that includes TMOs, by the way, this is the person who uses most often under pressure on the field. achieves the best performance. And that's telling and quite interesting to understand, right? Because what it says is that education and practice will improve how much people agree. Doesn't mean you'll agree they're right. It just means they agree with one another. Followed by those who use it second most, and then the coach. And the worst of all is the coach subjectively. So interesting. How does each element perform? You'll remember there are 4 questions. That's the overall performance. Not surprisingly, is there head contact, yes or no? 86% of the time, people will agree. Then it drops into the 70s for the next 3 questions. So if you want to improve the head contact process, you can improve it everywhere, but the biggest gains will come from taking these in the 70s up into the 80s and potentially the 90s. So this is a graph again showing you what's your target. For instance, 2/3 majority agreement is reached in 94% of cases when it comes to head contact. So that's good agreement. This is for foul play. You can see that the more agreement we want, the less likely we'll get it. Should be obvious. 2/3 majority in terms of foul play is reached in just about 2/3 of cases. Then comes danger. It's very similar to foul play. And that looks, there's mitigation, similar thing. So by the time you say you want 90% agreement, you're going to get that less than 40% of the time. And so foul play, danger, and mitigation have got the least agreement. That's where you could improve the process if you could help people understand when danger and mitigation should apply at different levels. Interesting observation. So therefore, to improve agreement overall, we need to understand how people assess foul play, danger, and mitigation. Now, the really interesting, this is my last slide, thanks for bearing with me on this one, or last concept anyway, is how does the coach's subjective perception, their initial reaction, compare to the head contact process? So what you're looking at here is a table. Going down on the left is the initial reaction, the subjective. In other words, the coach watches it. He says, that's yellow, that's red. And then here's the process where the coach uses the HCP. So in other words, now they go systematically through it, like I hope you did in my examples, and ask what it should be. And what I've done in green is highlight where they're agreeing. So it's 25% of the time, the initial reaction and the process give red card. 3% of the time yellow, 2% of the time penalty, 13% of the time play on. You add those up, you get 44%. So the coach's initial reaction and the process agree on 44% of final outcomes. So I'm curious to know why they disagree in the other 56%. So we take that 56% and we say, all right, what are the scenarios that are possible here? In these scenarios, for instance here, the coach says red, then they use the process, they get yellow. The coach says red, they get penalty. The coach says yellow, they get penalty. So in other words, their initial, their initial reaction is that it should be a red card or a yellow card. And then when they use the process, 1, 2, 3, 4, they say it should be yellow or penalty only. Have a look at those here. So in 5% of instances, the coach's initial reaction is red, then they get yellow when they use the systematic process. In 21% of the time, their initial reaction is yellow, the process gives them play on. In 9%, it's yellow to play on. In 7%, the initial reaction is red card, and when they use the head contact process, they get to play on. And as they drop 3 levels, all the way from red to yellow to penalty to play on. And so when you add that up, that gives you 55%. So of the 56% of instances where a coach and the process disagree, 55 of them actually have the head contact process being more lenient than the coach. The coach's initial subjective reaction is harsher than the head contact process. So when you listen to the media and when you watch coaches saying that this head contact process is too harsh and we're sending players off unnecessarily, please understand that this process is getting fewer red cards than the subjective opinion is. It's getting fewer yellow cards. It's turning red cards into yellows, into penalties, and into play-ons. On the other hand, there is only 1% of instances where the head contact process turns a decision into a harsher outcome. And it was once in all these 340 cases did a subjective opinion of a yellow card become a red card because of the process. Twice did a penalty become a yellow card? So 44% of the time they agree, subjectively and head contact process. In the other 56, almost every single one has a more lenient decision using the head contact process than the subjective opinion. And only 1% of the time is the head contact process harsher. And of 40% of decisions, the head contact process gives play on. See, scenario C, scenario E, and scenario F. You add those up, that's 40% of the time, whereas the coach perception is red, yellow, or penalty. So again, the narrative, it's so difficult to control this with facts, because the media and the coaches are saying, this process is too strict. It's designed to send players off. It's designed to cause yellow cards and red cards. In actual fact, the subjective opinion is harsher than the process. And I wish the media would grab hold of that. In fact, I'm going to send this to some people in the media to try and remind them of this reality. And again, this is 20 coaches and it's 17 clips. It should be 100 coaches and 400 clips. And that's what I hope to do one day. But that's where we are now. So very interestingly, I think, is that final picture. So hopefully that's given you an understanding of A, why the head contact process exists, B, how it evolved, C, the spaghetti chaos of how this thing was applied with good intentions, but the signal was received and interpreted differently. So some places went up, some went down. In some places, head contact was less likely to get carded than it was before the directive. How we've designed frameworks and decision-making tools to help referees make better decisions more often and allow you, the fan, to understand what those decisions are. And then finally, how the coach's subjective, instinctive response is actually often, more often than not, much harsher than what the head contact process provides. And so next time you're watching and you see that, use the 4 questions. You can understand, even if you disagree, you will understand how that referee has arrived at that position. And if that is all this video achieves, then I thank you for giving me the time of watching it. And I'll say thanks very much. Let's park rugby for a while. Big year next year again, of course. But until then, enjoy rugby and enjoy other sport. We'll talk about some of those in future. Thanks and goodbye.